Hello everyone, today we'll talk about the solution to the problem, count ways to build good strings. This problem is pretty interesting in that for a person who has some experience with competitive programming or with LeetCode, it should be very easy, and to somebody who's just starting out, one of the, let's say, observations that are used to solve this problem, or even the fact that we have to return the result modulo 10 to the 9 plus 7, might be a bit daunting. So I'll talk about those two patterns that I think exist in this problem, and of course about this modulo part separately. So the first pattern, which is very common and very easy to see if you have some experience, is the general idea of how to solve a problem like this, where you either give some zeros or you add some ones. You have to decide to do it, and you want to count the number of ways to do it. Well, of course, the naive, let's say, formed naive expression to calculate the number of ways is a recursive function, in that you either append the zeros, and the number of ways in which you can do it is the number of ways you can generate a string that's shorter by 0, so this variable 0 characters, because then you add those zeros and you have a new string. And again, you can, instead of appending zeros, append ones, and again you take a string that's shorter by this variable 1, and every string of that form creates a new unique string with those ones added. Very standard recursive formulation, so you can just use simple recursion with memoization. So we write add cache, we use the cache decorator in Python, and we write it in the straightforward fashion. So if we add 0, we recurse with the string shorter by this value 0, we recurse with the string shorter by this value 1, and we return the sum of that as a result. Of course, those are not all the details, and now the second pattern is in those details. Here we also have two new values, low and high, and we want our strings to be of a specific length. This might be pretty difficult if you're not familiar with this trick, with this pattern that I'm going to talk about now. But how do we count the number of strings of length between low and high? Well, if we could solve a simpler problem and count the number of strings with only high in mind, so all the strings that have length up to high, then notice that if we can solve that problem, we can solve our original problem, and probably solving the problem with just the value high is much easier. Because to count the number of strings of length between low and high, we can just calculate the number of strings of length up to high and subtract all the bad strings. And bad strings here are strings that have length up to high, but they have length that's lower than low. So lower than low means at most low minus 1. So we count the number of strings of length low minus 1. And the difference between those two is our result. And so the function go does not take two parameters, it only takes one parameter, which is the length. So we look at the length, the remaining length that we have. We compare it with 0 and 1, those two variables, to know if we can still recurse. And we also have a base case of just a single one, which essentially is for us that we decide at this point to cut the string short and not do anything. So we have essentially three decisions. Cut the string short and don't do anything. This is only one way to do it, and we can always do it. Or append those zeros. So now for every string that has L minus 0, right, this variable 0, that length, at most that length, then every way to generate that string gives us a way to generate a string of length up to L, and likewise for 1. So those are the three options. And of course at the end we have to return the value modulo this modulus, and the final result is the difference. Now, since we are calculating values modulo, this difference can be negative, and you have to know your language to know whether or not you have to write modulo modulus. It works in Python, but in other languages you might be forced to do something else, because modulo on negative numbers works differently. And in that case, the trick that you would do is to write go of high minus go of low minus 1 plus modulus modulo modulus, or just write an if statement. But you can always add modulus before taking modulo, that doesn't change anything. So, very standard problem, but those two patterns, so first the recursion that you can memoize in Python with just a single line. The second part is that you can, instead of taking both the left and right end of the interval, you can take only the right end and calculate the value for two different right ends. And of course, there is also the sprinkle of modulo. Inexperienced programmer, those may be If you have some experience under your belt, then this is a free problem.